Chapter 10. Separation. After hearing the news of Gilroy keeping zombies in the basement and Andrew's plan for a second raid, Beth sat silent for a moment. If there was ever a reason to leave the church, this would be it. The problem was, she could see Andrew wanted to stay. At least that's what she told herself. Deep down, a part of it was the pills. She'd been enjoying her escape from reality. But now, it was time to get focused.
He's right. Something like that might cause issues. Let's keep it quiet for now. As for you and this raid, my answer is no. We don't know what's in that building. It could be packed. It's too dangerous.
Andrew shifted in his seat, trying to stay calm.
Okay, just hear me out. We could go and take a look. If the building is packed, we won't go in. If it's empty, we'll go in, take a quick look, and if there's food, we come back and tell the others about it in the morning.
Beth was about to say no for a second time when an idea hit her. Getting up and going over to the window, she looked out at the school, then nodded.
Okay, just a look, right? Sure, you can go, but I'm going with you.
The expression on his face was priceless. If his jaw could have scraped the floor, it would have. Beth smirked.
Now that I think about it, there's a couple of people that might want to help. Yeah, this could work out. Great idea, Du. I'll go ask around. See you later.
Without waiting for him to respond, she walked out of the room with a smile on her face. Andrew was stumped. All he managed to say was,
"Wait, what?"
before the door slammed shut. When 10 o'clock rolled around, everyone in the building knew what was happening. Andrew and Chuck's scouting party had officially become a full-fledged raid, led by Beth. He should have been happy to see his mother getting back on her feet, but part of him felt slighted. She'd stolen some of his thunder, and Andrew wasn't sure how to process it. Trying to not let it bother him, he pushed the thought out of his mind and stood ready with his friends. There would be 2 teams. Of course, Gilroy wouldn't let something like this happen without his people, so Mouse would be with Andrew's crew, and Mr. Tolliver would be joining Beth's group. The 2 groups would go in and clear the school. Once it was safe, they'd clear out the cafeteria. Just like last time, everyone would be armed, but guns were a last resort. The goal was to get in and get out without losing anyone. If they pulled it off, the plan was to start doing daily raids for supplies. It was a cold night under a full moon when they stepped out onto the street. A handful of the dead shambled by, giving Andrew an adrenaline rush as they groaned, catching the scent of fresh flesh. Instinctively drawing his knife and changing direction, Andrew turned and moved towards the last of the zombies. Following his lead, Chuck and the rest of the team split from the adults. The move confused the zombies and broke up the pack, leaving Andrew's group with 3 to take down. This was better than he imagined. The 7 of them moved together without words. They flowed around the uncoordinated dead things, picking them apart. Outstretched arms were hacked away, legs were broken, and skulls were crushed. It was brutal, disgusting work, but to Andrew, it was beautiful. The spray of blood, the crack of bone, the groans of the dead filling his head, mixing with the sound of his pounding heart. It was perfect, and he wanted more. The adults had been left with 4 zombies of their own to deal with. For Beth, this was her first time since Roy. This time was different. She was ready. Armed with a machete, she stared down what was left of a construction worker lumbering towards her. By the look of him, he used to be pretty big. Now, he was a saggy bag of rotten meat in a reflective vest. Most of his face had been eaten away, leaving an exposed skull crawling with maggots, and he was missing an arm. Easily avoiding the lunging swipes, Beth swung the machete high and buried it in the zombie's neck. When the blade hit bone, it stopped and was snatched out of her hand by the big guy staggering. Almost losing her balance, Beth righted herself and pulled her knife. After being off her feet for a month, her reflexes were slow and her movements felt forced. Remembering her training, she drove the heel of her boot into his knee, and the big man went down. When he hit the ground, Beth stepped around to his head and plunged the knife through the back of his skull. There was a moment of disbelief that caused her to freeze up for a second. It wasn't until a member of her team, Arnold Briggs, pointed to Andrew's team that she snapped out of it. They were headed for the school, and she didn't want them getting too far ahead. Lucky for her, the machete came dislodged, and all she had to do was pick it up. The knife was another story. It was handled deep in the dead man's skull. Pulling it free resulted in a series of nauseating wet squelching sounds that nearly made her give up. Once she'd gotten it out and rejoined the group, and they quickly caught up. The raid on the school turned out to be a bittersweet victory. No one was injured, and they cleared the school with minimal effort. The cafeteria wasn't the gold mine they'd hoped for. All of the food in the freezers was rotten. There was no point in trying to salvage any of it. There was an industrial-sized can of vegetables and a few 50-pound bags of rice and flour. There was also a decent assortment of spices, along with pots and pans they could use. In all, it wasn't a bad haul, but it was great motivation. Even Gilroy got in on planning the next raid. For the first time, everyone was on the same page. The excitement caused a buzz in the main hall, and Andrew and his friends were in the center of it. The addition of his mother and the adults being on board made it that much better. This was it. He'd wanted this feeling to last forever. He couldn't help but smile as the group sat, poring over a map of the city. Gilroy pointed out a distribution hub on the east side. There were 10 warehouses that shipped out of the hub. Most were perishables like meat and produce, but 2 of them were strictly dry goods. This sparked a huge debate. They would need vehicles to move that much food, and that meant making noise. The other potential problem was that there could be other survivors already there. Beth wanted to send a scouting party out on foot, but Gilroy wanted to make one trip. In the end, they met somewhere in the middle. The raiding party would get half a day's head start to clear a path if necessary. At the halfway point, a box truck driven by one of Gilroy's people would be on the way. By the time the truck catches up, the raiding party should be at the hub. If there were survivors to contend with, they'd try to talk to them. If that didn't work, they'd leave without question. If the place was empty, they'd get what they could as fast as they could, because there would be zombies following the sound of the truck. After mapping out fallback points and contingency plans, everyone spent the day resting and getting ready. The next morning, as they were gearing up to leave, Beth pulled Andrew aside.
I've been thinking about what you told me. When we get back, we should let everyone know about the basement. What he's doing is dangerous. If one of those things gets loose in the church, a lot of people could die. We can't let that happen, Drew. We have to stop him.
Thinking about it for a second, Andrew nodded.
Okay. But what if he gets mad and throws us out?
Beth smiled and glanced around at everyone.
Throw us out? Look at these people. They're not following him out there. They're following us. He knows it. We know it. And most importantly, they know it. There's nothing to worry about. Trust me. We'll be fine.
Andrew took a second look at the raiding party and stopped when he noticed Jessica watching him. She gave him a nod, which he returned, then put his attention back on his mother. Before he could say anything, Beth gave him a funny look and smirked.
What was that?
Realizing he'd been caught, Andrew blushed a little and put his head down. Not wanting to embarrass him, Beth backed off, but she couldn't help but smile.
Anyway, listen, stay focused out there. This is the furthest we've been. Things might get bad. A few of us might not make it back. Are you ready for that?
He didn't hesitate to give her a quick nod of his head. In that moment, she saw it. It was so slight that anyone else would have missed it. There was a look in his eyes she'd seen before, and she didn't like it. A dead-eyed glare that sent goosebumps up her arms. It only lasted for an instant, but she'd caught it. She wanted to say something, but there was no time. They'd have to talk about it later. After a big hug, they parted ways and the raiding party hit the streets. The first few hours were spent moving cars and clearing roads for the truck. There were zombies in a lot of the cars, and most were out of gas, so the trip was slow going for a while. Occasionally, they'd hit open stretches, but the dead were everywhere. They couldn't pass a block without having to put a few down. 4 hours in, and they were more than halfway there. All of them were exhausted, but they weren't slowing down. A little under 2 hours later, they were staring at the hub. The layout was simple. 2 rows of 5 warehouses, separated by a lot big enough for semis to load and unload. The 2 dry good distributors were on separate sides. One was located at the end of the first row. The other was on the center of the second row. There were a few zombies roaming around, and one of the warehouses had been burnt down, but there didn't appear to be any survivors held up in there. To make things go faster, Andrew and his crew took the warehouse on the first row, leaving Beth and her team to search the other. Andrew and his crew moved through the lot, with Beth's team watching their backs. Once they disappeared into the warehouse, Team 2 got moving. They crossed the lot, cutting down a few zombies along the way. When they got to their target, Briggs and Mr. Tolliver got the doors open, while Beth and the others stood guard. Once they were inside, Briggs stayed at the door to keep watch. As soon as they stepped in, it was obvious someone had been staying here. A pair of empty sleeping bags had been laid out, and there were empty food containers scattered around. There was no blood and no sign of trouble till they made it to the restrooms. The only corpse they found was in the men's room. It wasn't a zombie, but Beth sort of wished it had been. Some poor soul had gone into one of the stalls and blown his brains out. Beth stood there staring at the body till someone called out, "All clear." Whoever the other sleeping bag was for, they weren't in the building. She figured that was probably why this guy killed himself. Pushing that thought aside and grabbing the gun, she hurried off to join the others. This place was a gold mine. Pallets of beans, rice, powdered soups, noodles, you name it, they had it. There was so much, they'd have to make multiple trips to get it all. Beth wondered what Drew and his team had found. If it was anything near this, they would have food for months. The excitement of the moment got to everyone. They all laughed and picked through boxes, talking about what they'd eat first. The fun didn't last long. The sound of an engine caught their attention. Gilroy's guys had arrived early. They all stood in stunned silence, listening to the truck back up to the dock. Once it was in place, Mr. Tolliver and Davis let the rolling door up, then opened the rear of the truck. As the door opened, almost everyone gasped. Gilroy and that young couple, the Clarks, from the church were inside. The Clarks were armed with assault rifles, and the moment Gilroy locked eyes with Beth, she knew what was coming. There was an explosion of gunfire as Beth and her team were gunned down. She felt a bullet rip through her arm, Then another through her leg, spinning her off balance. A third shot grazed her head. It hit just above her left eye and carved a groove that stopped over her ear. It wasn't a fatal injury, but she went down hard and blacked out when she hit the ground. The sound of an engine followed by gunfire grabbed Andrew and his team's attention. They'd been dealing with zombies since they entered the warehouse, and they hadn't gotten a chance to search the place. A group of 9 people had been in this building. At some point, one of them must have turned and infected the rest. The place was a mess and smelled horrible, but worst of all, a couple of them were runners. They must have been the last to go. Ultimately, it didn't matter. Andrew and his team made quick work of them, then went to see what was going on. When the bay door went up, they immediately saw the truck and the horde of zombies that had been following it. They were still a good ways off, but time was ticking. Andrew couldn't see what they were shooting at, so he assumed there had been zombies in the building. Whatever had happened, they were moving fast. You could see bags being loaded into the truck. Narrowing his eyes, Andrew tried to spot his mom, but he couldn't see her. They were cutting it close. The front of the horde was through the main gates and spilling into the lot. Since there was no reason to keep quiet, Andrew and his team pulled their guns and started firing into the oncoming crowd. They dropped a few of them, but most of their shots did little to slow the horde. Whoever the driver was, they must have realized time was up. The horn blared, and people hopped in the truck. Rather than waiting for it to get to them, Andrew's team charged into the lot and met them halfway. As they rounded the rear of the truck, Andrew's heart stopped when he saw Gilroy, Mr. Tolliver, and the Clarks.
Where is she? Where's my mom?
Extending a hand to help him into the truck, Gilroy shouted back.
I'm sorry, son. She and the others didn't make it. Get in. We have to go.
Those words landed like a shotgun blast to his chest. His body went numb, and his heart sank to the pit of his stomach. He couldn't move, think, or speak. His team was forced to physically pick him up and put him in the truck so they could get out of there. As they passed by through the lot, running over zombies, Andrew stared at the pile of bodies on the dock and saw his mother one last time before they sped away. Chapter 11. The gang's all here. After tailing the gang's scouting party for most of the morning, Jerry found himself on the roof of a burnout storefront, watching them rest. They'd been there for 10 minutes and were preparing to leave when the sound of a vehicle caught everyone's attention. While the 6 of them were trying to get eyes on it, Jerry had a clear view. Having the high ground put him in the right place at the right time. 2 blocks over, you could see a box truck speeding down the street. By the look of it, they were heading for the set of warehouses at the end of the block. Unfortunately, the noise of the truck's engine was attracting attention. Behind them, a wave of dead shambled along, filling the streets. There were hundreds of them. Most of the horde was falling behind, but there were pockets of runners that were keeping the chase going. Being sure to keep an eye on the gang, Jerry glanced back to see them on the move. They'd spotted the truck and were making a beeline straight for it. In Jerry's mind, this had to be why the gang was out here. He didn't know if they were supposed to meet the truck or ambush it, but either way, this might be his only chance. The second they were out of his sight, he climbed down and followed their trail. They were moving fast. It took a minute to catch sight of them again. Once he'd finally got eyes on the tailman, automatic gunfire in the distance caused them to pick up the pace. Knowing he couldn't keep up, Jerry found a safe spot to duck into and watched. Paying close attention to their path, He waited till they turned the next corner, then moved out. As he crossed over to the next block, he took a quick look to his left and stopped. The dead were coming from everywhere. The horde itself was flooding the street, but others were coming out of hiding. They were falling from rooftops and crashing through windows, taking out sections of the crowd. The ones that hit the ground were the worst. The wet smack of the flesh colliding with concrete was something Jerry never wanted to hear again. Trying to keep quiet, he jogged through a short alleyway and came out in time to see the truck go speeding by. The rear cargo door was open and he saw people inside, but none of them were from the gang. He watched them disappear around the next corner and heard gunshots from the warehouse a few seconds later. Readying the M4 he'd brought, Jerry moved towards the sound of gunfire. Ahead of him, a rolled-up door had been left open, and there were 3 zombies on the dock. All 3 had been put down, but there was more gunfire coming from inside the building. Moving quickly, Jerry climbed onto the dock just as the shooting stopped. Listening intently, he stood perfectly still till gunfire coming from the far end of the lot caught his attention. Turning to get a look, he saw the gang coming out of a different building.
You gotta be fucking kidding me.
He'd picked the wrong warehouse. Now, he had to get inside before they saw him. The second he stepped through the roll-up door, he saw someone. It was dark in there, so it was hard to see at first, but as he got closer, he saw her. She was sitting on the ground, propped up against the wall. There was blood covering her face, and she was bleeding pretty badly. Jerry couldn't tell if she was alive till her eyes popped open, and she pointed a gun at him.
Where is he?
She could barely keep the gun trained on him, and judging by the way her words were slurred, she was close to passing out. Seeing this, Jerry took his finger off the trigger, shushed her, then whispered,
Keep it down. They'll hear you.
As the words left his mouth, her hand dropped to her lap, and she slumped over. Letting out a sigh of relief, Jerry hurried over and took her gun, then risked a peep outside. The gang was running, and when he looked to the gate, he could see why. The horde was coming. The gang had a decent head start. If he went after them now, he might be able to keep up, but the dead would be on his heels. Thinking he'd be able to pick up their trail later, he pulled the roll-up door down and decided to wait it out. Looking at the woman there on the floor, Jerry considered letting her bleed out. She wasn't his responsibility, and she pointed a gun at him. The odds were, when she woke up, she'd probably try to kill him. Despite that, he did what he could to stop the bleeding. After cutting away her clothes and cleaning the wounds, he packed them with gauze, then wrapped them with bandages from his leg armor. There wasn't much he could do about the gash on her head. He bandaged and wrapped it, but she was going to need stitches, possibly staples. On the upside, she remained unconscious the whole time, so everything went well. Using a bottle of hand sanitizer to clean himself, Jerry glanced over at the woman and paused. She was basically naked. He didn't want to leave her laying there like that. As he started searching around, he found what she'd been shooting at. She'd put down a 4th zombie. The woman could barely keep her eyes open, and she dropped 4 of them. Slightly impressed, Jerry nodded to himself and was starting to move on when he noticed something. The last zombie looked familiar. Walking over to get a better look, he chuckled.
Briggs? Holy shit! How'd you...
Realizing he was talking to a corpse, he stopped himself and shook his head. Briggs had taken off when everything started. Jerry had wondered where he'd gone. Shaking off the flashback, he kept searching and came up with a shipping blanket and a pair of coveralls. After covering her with the blanket, he left the clothes next to her, then went to get a look outside. There were a lot of zombies, but most of them were outside the gates. If he was careful and stayed out of sight, he could probably use them to pick up the gang's trail. When they took off running, a good chunk of the horde followed them. With any luck, the dead pinned them in somewhere, and he'd be able to find them fast. Time was ticking. There was no telling what was happening to Cindy. He needed to get this done so he could find her. Mentally preparing himself for what he was about to do, Jerry closed his eyes for a second and took a deep breath. Once he was focused, he nodded to himself, then went to check on the woman one last time. When he got back to the dock, she somehow managed to drag herself over to the bodies and get a gun. Aiming it at him, she winced and asked,
"Where is he?"
Her hands were shaky, and her eyes were slightly glazed over. Jerry knew she might pull the trigger if he moved too fast.
Take it easy. I don't know what you're talking about. Who's he?
Blinking rapidly and adjusting her aim, she barked.
"Where is he?"
Trying to stay calm, Jerry spoke slowly and kept his hands where she could see them.
I don't know, but if you put the gun down, I'll try to help you out.
Reluctantly lowering the gun, she winced again and let out a groan as she tried to sit up.
Okay then. When I got here, I saw a truck speeding out. There were a bunch of people in it. Maybe whoever you're looking for is with them. I'm leaving. I've bandaged you up and left you something to put on. You're pretty banged up. My advice? You should stay put for a while. The dead are everywhere. You won't make it off the block in your condition. I'm just saying, it's your life. Do what you want. But I'm out. Good luck.
With that, he gave her a friendly nod, then turned to leave, but she stopped him.
Were they teenagers?
In the truck? I don't know. Maybe. They were moving fast. I didn't get a good look.
She nodded and put her head down. Jerry could tell the lady needed help, but he had his own problems.
Look, I gotta go, but I'll come by here on my way back. If you're still here, I'll do what I can to get you on the road. I'm Jerry. What's your name again?
Beth. And my son's name is Andrew. That's who I'm looking for.
All right, Beth, sit tight. There's plenty of food in here, and I saw a water cooler in the break room. You should be okay for a while. I'll be back.
She thanked him for bandaging her up, and he hit the road. Getting away from the warehouse turned out to be a lot harder than it should have been. From the moment Jerry snuck through the rear entrance, there were problems. First, he had to put down a pair of crawlers that had been lurking behind the building. After that, following the zombie trail led him through a pocket of survivors that were dropping cinder blocks off the rooftops to kill zombies. The problem was, they didn't discriminate. Anyone around those buildings were getting bombed. Once he managed to avoid getting squashed, he encountered the single worst thing he'd seen since all of this had started. While weaving his way through a maze of abandoned cars, Jerry came face to face with a bloated zombie. It looked like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, and when Jerry hit it with his bat, the fucking thing popped. It made a wet clap sound, splattering guts and black blood on everything, including Jerry. The smell made his eyes and lungs burn while he slipped in the ooze around his feet. When they finally did get clear of it, things went from bad to worse. Apparently, the odor worked as an attractant. The next thing he knew, there were a pack of drooling ghouls chasing him. There was no point in being quiet anymore. As soon as he'd put some distance between him and the pursuers, Jerry thumbed the safety off his M4, then turned and opened fire. He made quick work of them, but between the noise and his new perfume, he was attracting all sorts of attention. Before he knew it, he dropped half a dozen, and there were more coming. Street for street, block for block, the dead were flocking to him, and he was running out of steam. Call it luck or divine intervention. Ahead of him, he saw 3 men wearing cuts, waving him into a bank. It was them. He'd found the gang. Pushing himself to the limit, he raced inside and collapsed as they slammed the door shut behind him. He laid there sucking wind, trying to get himself together as the 3 men turned their guns on him. The closest one, a slim guy with bad teeth and a face full of tattoos, grumbled.
"Fuck me, he stinks. Smells like one of them geeks out there."
Another of them, a muscular man with a shaved bald head, asked.
"You ain't bit, are you?"
Sitting up, Jerry shook his head.
Nah, I'm good. Damn, I'm glad you fellas were here. Don't think I could have kept that up.
"The fuck were you doing out there? We heard you coming from a mile away."
The third guy asked. Unlike the other 2, he was on the chubby side and was noticeably shorter than them. Getting to his feet, Jerry took a look around and didn't see the rest of the gang.
I was looking for a woman. Did you guys see anyone out there?
The slim guy laughed.
Hell, brother, ain't we all? You looking for any woman? Or do you have a specific one in mind?
Since Jerry had never actually seen Cindy, there was no way for him to describe her. The only thing he could do was try to bluff his way through this.
Her name's Cindy. She's in her 20s. Probably would have been traveling alone.
The guy seemed to get a good laugh out of that. While it wasn't the response he was hoping for, his question got them to let their guards down. There wouldn't be a better time. Before any of them realized what was happening, Jerry brought his gun up and shot the bald guy in the face. Turning his attention to the other 2, he aimed low and shot them both in the legs. With the 2 of them screaming and zombies pounding at the door, Jerry set his rifle down and pulled his bat from his pack.
Okay, fellas, I'm gonna make this quick. A day or so ago, you guys cleaned out a building near Quickstand. You took a shitload of supplies, but most importantly, you took the girl. Where is she?
The short guy spoke up first.
"Fuck you! I'm gonna tear your fucking head off, you piece of..."
There was a loud thwack from the impact of the bat obliterating his skull, splattering his brains across his buddy's face. Skinny, the last man standing, so to speak, instantly started babbling.
Shit, look, man. I wasn't on that run. Bobby and some of the other boys did that one. They're going to Lake St. Clair to meet up with Skinny Pete. I swear, man, it wasn't me.
Thinking about it for a moment, Jerry looked at the bodies, then nodded and smiled.
You know what? I believe you. Thanks for being honest.
With that said, he clutched the bat, then looked Skinny in the eyes and bashed his head in. Once he cleaned himself up, Jerry swapped shirts with the chubby guy and took the pants from the musclehead, and he got moving. The smell was still on him, thanks to his armor, but it wasn't as bad now. As long as he kept his distance, the dead didn't notice him. It took the rest of the day to get to the lake, but by nightfall, he was setting up camp on the roof of a Starbucks. He was starting to regret not asking more questions. If he was smarter, he would have asked where they were meeting. From where he was sitting, there was a good view of the lake. He scanned the area looking for signs, but with no lights, all he could make out were shapes. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and he drifted off, but his rest didn't last long. Sunrise kicked off with gunfire. Startled out of his sleep, Jerry popped up and was shocked to see a boat docked near the City Hall building. The shots were clearly coming from there, but he couldn't see who was doing the shooting. He watched for a while, till he saw a man wearing cuts sneaking around the building. Grabbing his gear, Jerry used the access ladder to climb down, then rushed to get closer. When he finally got a good look at what was going on, he was confused. There was an older guy and a woman shooting it out with the gang. They were both using AR-15s and wearing tactical gear. Whoever these two were, they meant business. As always, the noise of the shootout was attracting attention. Zombies were starting to swarm towards the commotion. Knowing he was running out of time, Jerry got in the fight. Since no one knew he was there, it was easy to sneak up behind the men he'd seen and take them out. He killed one and wounded the other. He needed at least one of them alive. After that, he moved in and found himself taking fire from the building as he approached. Luckily, the distraction gave the old man and his partner the chance they needed. The two of them stormed the building, and a short while later, the shooting stopped. Jerry held his position till he saw the old man and woman come racing out of the building. They both let off shots in the direction of the boat. It wasn't until then that Jerry saw one of the bikers on board it. They tried their best to stop him, but they couldn't. The two of them watched as he pulled away in what Jerry guessed was their boat. Feeling as though the battle was over, Jerry approached with caution till the duo spotted him. Considering the situation, he wasn't surprised that they came in hot. Guns up, barking orders, they stripped him of his weapons, then patted him down. Once they were sure he wasn't a threat, the old man extended a hand.
The name's Walter. That's Paula.
He pointed to his partner, then to the group of 3 people Jerry hadn't noticed.
That's my son Daniel, Virginia, and Holly. I saw you backing us up. Thanks for the help.
Jerry nodded, then glanced back at the approaching zombies.
That's great and all, but can we do this inside? I don't want to be out here when the welcome wagon arrives.
Nodding in agreement, Walter motioned to Paula. Then the 3 of them hurried over to the others and got inside.